This video contains major spoilers for Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, and Skyward Sword. Over the past year, I've played a lot of Zelda. Tears of the Kingdom was a great game that I thoroughly enjoyed, and I've been reliving my childhood through Skyward Sword HD. The two games represent radically different design philosophies within the series. Each game has their own strengths and weaknesses, so that begs the question, where do we go from here? I'm Ouroboros. Let's talk. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are obvious departures from the foundation that Ocarina of Time built. They're essentially a modern-day version of the original Legend of Zelda. I've mentioned this across a variety of videos, but some of my favorite moments in games are where I'm allowed to simply just exist in the world. Bask in the splendor of the landscape, the awe of the ecology, the wonder of the music. And Tears of the Kingdom does a great job of this. The world is vast and grand with a variety of environments. While empty, it gives so much room for creativity and discovery. The world is absolutely the highlight of the two new Zeldas. Unfortunately, that freedom comes at a big cost. There's very little room for a narrative and progression in them. As much as I love piecing together what happened so long ago, it feels so disconnected to what's currently happening in the game. I think Zelda's story is so well written, and I love the character growth that she has in both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, but none of her actions really matter. None of the moments really drive the plot forward because they've already happened. The new champions and sages try to make up for that, but they really just boil down to go to a new area, see the problem, fight the boss, and the problem is gone. So all of those major players in the current plot are really relegated to side characters. It's almost like a really fleshed out side quest, especially because the new dungeons are so disappointing. I actually really liked the Divine Beast and some of the new temples, but they're just so short. It takes like 20, maybe 30 minutes to clear most of them. And this de-emphasizes the importance of dungeons, which have pretty much always been the best aspect of Zelda games. Because they've de-emphasized the dungeons in favor of the world, you also lost that great sense of progression that comes with completing a dungeon in an area. You're given all the tools to complete the game on the plateau and the Great Sky Island, so the upgrades that you get in the dungeons don't have a huge impact on the gameplay. I think that Tears of the Kingdom did attempt to fix this. The stage abilities are helpful, and I love that they now fight with you, but they suck. Like, they're never really relevant in combat, and their abilities are so hard to effectively use. You have to run to them and then press A for all of them. So they either run away from you or you activate the wrong ability. It's so frustrating and such a massive downgrade from the champion abilities. I just ended up never using any of them because I could not get them to work properly. There are some interesting gear upgrades you can get throughout the game. I enjoy playing around with different elemental weapons, and making crazy food combinations is cool. So Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom sacrifice progression and narrative in favor of player freedom. On the other hand, Skyward Sword sacrifices player freedom in favor of progression and narrative. Skyward Sword's dungeons are really incredible and so much longer than Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. I remember getting to the Skyview Temple and enjoying it so much more than a majority of the new dungeons. And it's only the first dungeon in Skyward Sword. That's not even mentioning the Sandship and Skykeep, both of which are some of my favorite dungeons in the entire series. The Sandship forces you to think about the dungeon in two completely separate ways, the present and the past, at the same time. And the Skykeep is one of the most creative areas in any game. And while the Divine Beast strongly resembles Skykeep, all of their puzzles are really isolated. Instead of feeling like you're progressing through an ever-evolving level, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom feel like you're solving independent puzzles that just happen to be connected for the sake of gameplay. And Skyward Sword's narrative is monumentally better. Zelda and Link's relationship is the best in the series, and that relationship is used as the foundation for both of their actions. Like always, they're major players in the story, but their actions influence other characters like Groose and Girahim. They're relevant to the plot at every moment instead of just being relegated to backstory. But all of these things are in stark contrast to the restrictive railroading that Skyward Sword brings. The sky is really nothing more than a backdrop for you to go from A to B. It is so barren. There's a couple islands here and there, but they really needed to spend more time fleshing it out. And this makes the sky and surface level feel incredibly disconnected. I think if the cloud layer progressively dissipated throughout the course of the game, that would have made it feel better, but it almost feels like jumping into the paintings of Mario 64. It's only a few steps away from just being a level select screen. While Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom can also feel barren at times, there are always things for you to discover. There's nothing to discover in the sky, and there aren't even really any settlements on the surface. You do encounter other races on the surface, but it's only a few individuals here and there. So while the characters you meet are charming, they feel very much like NPCs you meet because that's what the game wants, instead of people living in the world. There are well-established communities in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, and even after the destruction of Hyrule, they still exist. I think it could have been really awesome to see a group of Hylians still living in secret on the surface. Even just seeing a town of Magmas or Kikwis would have gone a long way to establish the culture of the surface dwellers. So where does that leave us? Well, I love the world and freedom of New Zelda. It gives you the ability to play with the game on your own terms. And it's really hard to beat the flexibility of the Ultra Hand. However, the item progression and narrative of old Zelda is just so polished. There's a reason Nintendo stuck to that formula for roughly 15 years. I guess the question that needs to be asked is how, or rather if, these two styles can be blended. And the answer that I came to, I don't really know. I don't know exactly how you would be able to have a massive open world with insane amounts of player freedom and still keep a linear story. The game would just devolve into following waypoints on a map. I think Tears of the Kingdom tried to address most of these issues. There's a bit of linear story. You have to get 4 stages before unlocking the final one. It does unlock new areas of the map for you, but really outside of that, it's mostly Breath of the Wild 2.0. I think the dungeons would absolutely need to be reworked. I liked how Tears of the Kingdom had them incorporate the stage abilities, but they need to be much more of a focus and need to be much longer. I think a good compromise would be to have the open world of New Zelda, but the dungeons and bosses of Old Zelda. I appreciate that there are multiple ways to defeat the new bosses, but they should feel like a culmination of what you've learned in the dungeons, and that would start with heavy utilization of its mechanics and items. I shouldn't feel like I have all of the tools and skills to beat a boss as soon as I step into a dungeon. They're the final test, not just another stepping stone. And I think it would be cool to have multiple encounters with them throughout their respective regions. It would give their fights more weight. That's why Girahim is one of my favorite villains in the series. You don't necessarily need to fight them, but just a little bit of screen time can go a long way. I'd also like to see some more creative dungeon aesthetics. I feel like the Zelda series is a little too stuck in the dungeons being representative of the elements, fire, water, forest, lightning, things like that. There have been some standouts. I love the City in the Sky and Arbiter's Grounds in Twilight Princess. There was lore about them and they felt like actual places that became dungeons due to unfortunate circumstances, rather than a level plopped in for the sake of having a dungeon. And having more creative environments could definitely help with this. We've kind of been stuck with the same water, forest, mountain, desert, snow environments for so long now. And with Monolith Soft playing a big role in the development of New Zelda's worlds, I'd love to see Nintendo go crazy with them. This would help both the world and dungeons feel far more engaging. Even the items could use a bit of an overhaul. I'm so used to getting boomerangs, bows, bombs, that getting them doesn't even feel memorable now. And you can always tell what item you're gonna get in the dungeon. The spinner and Dominion Rod from Twilight Princess and the Gust Bellows and Whip from Skyward Sword were so much fun because they deviated from the usual Zelda items. As for the narrative, I think it'd be cool to travel the world and then the world changes as you hit certain plot points. Like maybe Link and Zelda travel to a village and when they're there, it's raided by the Yiga. So not only does the village need to be reconstructed, but you also need to hunt down those remaining clan members and rescue people who were captured by them. Or maybe they reach the Master Sword and they need something like the spiritual stones from Ocarina. So only then can you go ask the village elders for them. I'm no game designer or writer, so I'm sure the devs over at Nintendo can come up with much more fluid and integrated plot moments. But the narrative needs to be more relevant to what's going on during the game, not way before. We're at a big crossroads right now with Zelda. I'm fairly certain that the Breath of the Wild style is gonna stick around for a while. The games have just sold way too well for Nintendo to abandon that design philosophy. To me, that's one of the best parts of this franchise though. Pretty much every game feels pretty unique from one another, both in terms of art style, but also game mechanics. And there's nothing wrong with liking old or new Zelda more. I like both styles. I think they bring different things to the table, and I appreciate what they attempt to do. I think there's big positives and negatives to each, but the real question is, how does Nintendo proceed from here? Does Breath of the Wild become the new Ocarina of Time, serving as both the foundation for the next decade or two? Or do they try to merge the lessons they learned from the Switch Zeldas to try to iterate the series even more? Like I said, I don't know the answer. I'm just some dude who makes YouTube videos that no one watches. But since Zelda has been with me longer than just about any other series, I'm invested in the course it will take. However, there's one thing that I know for certain. I'll continue to love and be excited for this series, and it will continually strive to push the limits of gaming. Thanks for watching.